want to print this out double-sided?
No, it makes it look bigger.
Space. Yeah, I think the thin pieces look cool. Like, you get like a narrow one. Have you seen Roman's dissertation?
No, it's like really.
Well, he has one that it's like printed as if it's like a ComSol manual. It's like maybe 8 inches tall and like 4 inches wide. It's like sort of like a pamphlet book. Sort of like the size of the Seder. Actually, you guys should. I guess this isn't a webcam, right? So you can't see Sean back.
No.
I want to tune in to Passover this year. You guys should.
Yeah.
That up. Is it all planned out already? Are you guys doing it?
No, I have no idea, but I've been. Wait, go live now. No.
Google Hangouts, get Ryan in.
I don't know why it's not working right now.
Wait, so are you webcamming it from your computer then?
Yeah.
Also, is there like a water fountain around here? I'm thirsty.
The closest bathroom is all the 2 floors down to the big lecture hall and around the corner.
Someone should be bringing refreshments here, right?
At the end, I assume.
Did you request any champagne, or is it just whatever
I brought some champagne.
You brought some?
Yeah,
unless
it's
what else. Like Roman had you covered or something.
Live control room. Am I? I can't even tell. Maybe no, I don't think I'm on, even though there's a picture of me.
Yeah, I think we're also going to. I don't know. Are you in the loop with like the sushi place?
I heard, yeah, sushi place.
But it's like I think. So there's an email asking where to go, and I think people were voting. And then I think what was it? It's like I think there's sort of a split between Masa and Sushi Palace. And then I think Ting sent an email to like me, Jake and Carl saying like John voted for Masa, but Jake and Carl wanted Sushi Palace. So all of us just switched our votes to the other one. So I don't think it helped. And I think Craig said there's a third sushi place.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to that one.
So I think Craig just said
it's the Masa people opened one up near Tiger Tail, is what he was saying. Like up near him.
Oh, well, yeah, he must love that. That's his 2 bigger places.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think now. Where was it that had the perfect sushi roll? Was it Masa or Sushi Palace? I remember there was one I really liked. I think they had perfected sushi.
This event can't be featured because it's private. Fine, but I don't think it's actually private. It's not private. It's unlisted. Save. I'll change the save. Control room. Why doesn't... This is really annoying because it was just working easily yesterday. This is the way it goes, right? Yeah. Alright. 10 minutes and I'm just giving up on it.
Yeah. So when you guys try to do with Craig, do you schedule it through Sheila?
Oh, wait. Something.
You're very ghetto quality.
Yeah, I turned the quality way down. I don't know if that was the issue. There's like usually like a 20-second delay. There's me putting the laptop down.
I was gonna say, what's happening? Yeah, I'll see if I can get it.
And then you'll see it again in that one. You'll see it again in the one before and again.
That's pretty cool. You should just like
the whole of mirrors. Now the third one in, you'll see it. Hey, Minnie.
Hey, Minnie.
Hey, John.
Yeah, you seem more excited.
Yeah, I know. I didn't get the same reaction.
What is that?
That's a live stream.
Like in the back of the stream, the guy's about to get up.
Yeah, there you go.
Are you videoing this to?
I'm sending it out over YouTube,
Oh.
so watch what you say.
Wow.
It's going out on the internet.
Is it?
I wonder if I can tell how many people are watching.
Does it have volume too?
I think so. I think they can hear us. One watching now. That's me, though.
I can send it to Hillary, see if she wants to watch it.
So that's why, yeah, maybe go like out in the hallway and turn it on, see if you can hear me.
Let's see. How did you send it to me? Did you email it?
Yeah, although I wonder if the link I sent out isn't working.
Still says it'll be again in a few minutes.
Yeah, I think I need to send a different link.
Yeah, this is not the right one.
Alright, let me just BCC so I send it to everybody.
Are your parents still working, or what do they do?
Yeah, my mom's retiring this year. She's a teacher. My dad's working, but I mean they would have come. I just didn't.
Yeah. Well, how are they gonna watch it then? They like watch it on
Yeah,
at work?
probably like put it on their phone. Who else did I send this to?
Maybe has been art watching it. She's working too, right?
Yeah, she's probably just gonna have her phone on with the little kids. Sean, who else did I send this to? Oh, Mark.
Actually, yeah. This weekend was St. Patrick's Day in Wilmington, and I think some drunk people knocked off my mirror.
Really?
So
Oh, that sucks.
Hillary actually drove me up because she has an office in Princeton.
Oh. Oh, Hillary should. Well, I mean, she's working.
Yeah, I don't think she can come in. Watch it live.
Try the new link I just sent out.
I'll forward everything.
Oh, actually, my mom just said working. So
What? How's she?
I don't know. Try the new
Did
link.
you email it to me? I don't think you sent it to me.
You were on it. There's a new one I just sent. Oh, maybe you weren't.
Yeah, I don't think I see it.
Oh, hold on. Is it working for you though? The old link?
The old one's not working. It says like we'll begin. I think it's a different link you're sending now.
Yeah. Try the new link. And then turn your volume up. Well, don't turn it up near the speaker though.
I think
There'll be an infinite
hall
hall
that
that
goes.
goes.
20 minutes or 20 seconds before. I feel like this is pretty fun to watch. Yeah, I think I heard something.
So they sound. I would say though, don't get the sound too close to the computer.
This isn't an Apple product. My speakers are very weak.
Alright. Let me actually optimize the position here.
Or maybe you should like point it at put the screen on the side. Because I assume you're going to be off screen most of the presentation.
Yeah. I know, but you know, it's like I said, there's this beautiful camera in the room that I can't use, so.
Yeah. But I mean, if you like spend all your time on this side of the room, you can just point the camera in the middle.
All right. And my undergrad advisor, she just said he's getting it. Let's see if I can bring presentation up. Device unavailable. It's great.
Actually, Minnie just had the refreshment cart, didn't she?
Oh, yeah, I think she's supposed to put things in the fridge. The fridge is 2 floors down.
Yeah, this building. Is that the most environmentally friendly configuration of bathrooms?
Oh, yeah, water It's always better that it says a gravity flush with all the bathrooms on the bottom.
Actually, I bet this building will flood one day. Yeah, just given that
Yeah.
it's underground.
Actually, the first time that with the heavy rain, I was wondering what would happen.
Only a matter of time.
So now the phone can't find the computer.
Are we gonna control the slides from your phone?
Yeah.
It's too high tech.
But if the phone can't find the computer, then all bets are off, because I am definitely not reaching over the table to do that. I'm going to have to turn the stream off.
This monitor here is pretty fancy too. I didn't realize.
Oh, this is a 90-inch screen.
It's not a projector, right? It's
Nope.
just a monitor.
I'm sure that's wasn't cheap.
Yeah, I think before my FPO, for a while I was trying to entertain the idea of staging PowerPoint malfunction and giving a chalk talk.
The thought crossed my mind this morning of what would happen if the computer didn't turn on this morning or something.
I feel like you don't get that many opportunities to give a chalk talk.
This is a little worrying. I can't get the PowerPoint, or I can't get my phone to find my computer. Is it saved? Try restarting Keynote.
And I feel like Barry Royce, you're so early.
Yeah, I know.
He's coming, or is he
Yeah, he told me he was
protesting
coming.
your thesis?
He told me he was coming. I know, I'm a little surprised he's not here yet. Let's try this again. Alright, you want to open up the live stream, just make sure you can see the title slide up here. Suit jacket on.
It's kind of warm in here.
Yeah, I know, that's why I'm thinking I'll be wearing this jacket for long. I should have brought a wireless mouse, just in case the remote didn't work.
You like click it from that keyboard on the thing?
No, that's connected to the Clary Ion screen.
Yeah, this is nothing to do with your computer.
Not really. Yeah, let's see. Is it starting up on here?
It's slow. Actually, I should just connect to the Wi-Fi. I think I still have my login.
Oh, you're on. Yeah, you're over the air.
The angle's a little weird.
Yeah, tilt the screen a little bit.
Yeah, I think that would. Or like put it on a pedestal or something. Did you do it?
It'd take 20 seconds.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, that looks a lot better actually.
Okay. I think it's running smoothly. We'll see. This little computer's got a lot going on inside it right now. You know, over 2-year-old.
My PC is, I think it's about 5 years old now. It's not going to last much longer. It's even a thing where it overheats. You cook an egg on it.
Yeah, so what do you think about that thesis?
Yeah, it looks good. I think every time people pass these around, I never have it in me to actually try to read it.
I think I did mention you and Jake by name in the acknowledgments.
That's true.
Everybody else got just the Arnold group.
This paper
Has a watermark in it.
what does it say?
I don't know. I'm sure they charged me for that.
Did you,
I just called them up and said, do it.
man, just got a good job lined up after this. Did mine on the cheap. Do you have a dedication?
Yeah. Oh, not that.
Thomas.
everybody who reads it, it gets dedicated to them.
What was unexpected? The fact that you're graduating?
This was written at like 3 in the morning, the night before I sent it to the, not the readers, the night before I sent it to the printer, I guess.
These sentences. True Spechler quality. At East, that's in
That's my high school.
New Jersey.
Yeah, actually, I was trying to look up Chuck Kim. See, he's acknowledged in there. I have no idea what he's doing now.
Did you write this like right after the?
Yep.
I see what's going on now.
Yep.
Nice.
And Jill told me I had. So I brought it down to Jill, and she's like, "You need to have that sentence." I was like, "What sentence?" Like the sentence, the record
the
for the.
number.
I was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about." She said, "All right, I'll just print it out." And so this is like an inserted page.
Really?
Somehow the
How'd you do
printer knew how to. Or no. I gave it. I gave the thesis and this page to Shattuck, and they somehow got the numbering right.
So this follows too. How'd you get it right?
I don't know. Those bookbinders, ancient trade.
But it's like the print.
Well, they printed it too. Like I said, I
Yeah.
sent them a Google Drive file,
Maybe they edited it.
and I just said, do it. I was also doing my area orientation trip the week that I sent it. There you go. See, those are your trade secrets.
Actually, Kapton should be R. It's that's unacceptable.
I thought I fixed that. I was supposed to capitalize.
Yeah.
But look,
R.
there you go. It's right there. It's registered. I even cite some sort of document. Sheila.
You see another one without the R over here.
What was that?
There's no R right here.
Well, I did it the first time it was mentioned. So I need to turn that off from my. I hope that doesn't echo
Actually,
through the live
here's
stream.
3 more without R's.
Yeah, I did it the first time. Whatever. I'm not gonna do it every time.
Yeah, so it's like anytime we use a DuPont trade name, we have to put the R there. It's like no matter what. And if we don't, then someone's gonna flip out somewhere.
Hopefully nobody. Well, you're the only person from DuPont that would be.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem. The lawyers find this and they say, "Oh, Kapton's a commodity now. Anyone can use the name."
Button my collar at least.
I was reading a book the other day, and Eustace von Liebig had like a couple pages dedicated to him.
Really?
Apparently, he's the father of like modern fertilizing.
That's pretty cool.
So,
Have you there's a great new Netflix show, Cooked, that you would like. Nathan Myhrvold is featured.
I
in
think
it.
I did. Is that the one
Hey,
with the
Emma.
writer guy?
Hey.
Morning, Barry.
You remember this fellow?
Yeah, how are you?
I've seen you before somewhere. How are you?
So Barry, actually, I wanted to ask you to be my illumination expert and tell me the shade level and the light level. Thank you for coming.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So you may not. But it's better to do it in advance.
So
Then you won't be insincere when you say thank you at the exit.
probably the shades all the way down. You think? It's so dark out.
This is probably your first time in this room too, right?
Well, I came on Friday.
it's a display.
Because I had a meeting downstairs and I wanted to find out where it was.
Yeah, it's 90 inches. It's crazy.
It's insane the way this building is constructed. We
Yeah.
had to go down 3 flights and up 2 to get here.
Josh
coming
told me to
from
just come
Chemical
into that
Engineering.
door.
Yeah, but it's pissing with rain.
Yeah.
Let's see. Such are the ways of progress.
So this is being streamed over YouTube right now.
Yeah, they're listening to us.
So, yeah, I don't know how well the sound is working, but they might be able to hear.
Who's tuned in?
What was that?
Who's tuned in?
Family. Family, undergrad advisor,
And my phone.
John's phone.
Actually, that's what we'll do next, I guess. We'll
Stream.
We'll do Skype in our offices.
That's right.
Shout
Never worry about the rain.
Actually, we've done one FPO that way. With somebody
Who had to leave the country.
who was in Malaysia.
Makes sense.
I love the reflection of the screen of the fluorescent light.
We can turn those off. So that is what I wanted your opinion on, is illumination.
Yeah, I think we should
The
probably
chair
do
is
the
so
lights.
nice.
I know, you're some of the first people to sit in these chairs. So. Let's see. I can. Oh, that's too much.
Oh, that's nice for
Is there
looking
in
at the
between?
screen. Can you just have a back row on? Or?
I can do only front row, but I don't
You
know.
cannot control the light? It's not fancy enough, this room.
There's probably a way to do
In
it.
this room, the lights control you.
Is that good?
Isn't it? It should be opposite?
It should be opposite.
That's what it was when we walked in, was opposite.
Yeah.
Is this better than we walked in? Or
This is worse.
This is worse. Okay.
Or you want it dark by the screen and light by the
Yeah, that's how it was when
Yeah,
we walked
but
in.
I mean, if you go to the main lecture theater in Bowen, even
Or we could do no
floodlights on the
Yeah.
screen.
Diffuse light through the clouds.
Too
That's
much.
pretty
That way you never see.
It's just
But
insane.
yeah, open like
You
that.
think open these and shut these off?
Yeah.
It's a nice, lots of clouds, diffuse light today, right? So
We'll
Tell
wait
me,
for
is
the daffodils to bloom as you're going.
that's right. Is this too dark?
Is there kind of like a glare though?
Yeah, there's probably glare from the outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, you're saying the way it was when we walked in has been the best so far. All right.
Andrew, that's a distinct disadvantage to these
Good.
monitors.
All right, we're working out the illumination.
Hey,
Hey, how's it going?
All right,
Doing great, how are you?
Oh, you graduated, man.
I know, I did.
Hey John, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good.
You guys are so nice to each other.
Very cordial.
I mean it. I was like sending this email for you guys to debate which one is better. But like you guys just like, okay,
Just
let's
just
go.
go with let's go.
Yeah,
with
was that what it was?
I do think I would rather go to Sushi Palace.
Oh really?
Really?
Yeah, I'm ready to go to Sushi Palace.
Oh, okay then.
So,
But you know, we don't have to stick with what we planned.
well, I heard
so-
we're going to the third one that Craig knows.
Oh. Uh-oh.
Yeah,
Craig knows the place.
We'll see what happens then.
So your examiners and advisor are lost trying to get in.
I was advised to, and I did send explicit directions to the examiners, but we'll see. They're here. Oh, Wally. Hi, Wally. All right, so one examiner and one advisor still.
I thought I was late.
No.
I like the screen.
Actually,
Yeah,
in
it's
this
beautiful
building,
display.
instead of an academic 5 minutes, we have an academic 15 minutes, so that people can find out where they really are.
Oh, that's a
Salt
thesis?
maze.
Thanks for coming, guys. Yeah, there's a thesis here and a thesis there.
No, nice.
We're not allowed to mutilate.
Look at that.
Well, yeah, you can look at it, just not
Look at
mutilate.
that page is that.
One of them has to go to the library.
Or like crossing that.
Coming in through that door, it's actually.
We'll get that a lot, won't we? Probably.
It's like, there's like, there's no way this is one level. It's like,
Yeah,
this
I know,
is
it's
the top
very-
and that's
yeah.
the bottom.
One is street level, and then 00 is the lecture hall or something.
Yeah, if you pick up the dungeon map and the compass, it's a lot easier.
But one floor below is B. It was like, that was like
Oh,
B
yeah, that was
something.
confusing.
The little,
No, absolutely
landing.
not. This is like the third time we've been in here.
Is anyone working here?
Dan Steingart's lab is now all in this building. And the grad students have offices in this building, which is nice new offices.
Of course.
Thanks for coming, Matt.
It requires. Unless, of course, we got too lost.
Do you remember this guy?
Oh, wow.
cannons.
Yeah,
The laser, big, huge laser.
That's right, I was just thinking.
Josh, did you install these lasers?
Like my money.
Below these TVs?
Yeah, these are their turn.
Yeah, so you,
It's
Yeah, I'll send you my
asking
email.
questions that you don't want to answer.
also you have to wait for my transfer from my bank.
Is this like that scene in Austin Powers where all timestamps.
That's
Oh yeah.
That's the control panel.
That's nice.
Everything is very fragilely set up. The live stream, the iPhone is controlling the presentation.
Nice.
I feel like it's a house of cards. So.
Timely.
So if you rattle the
Should I-
table,
can I-
you
wait,
won't
can I-
be able
That's
to
what I'm
talk.
thinking. Yeah.
Can
So
I
if this
wa-
goes, I have to cut the live stream because I have to use the
You
computer.
found the spelling.
Can I live stream and like what double watch?
Uh,
If I miss something there,
Oh,
I can
I
listen
It's all over the place.
No.
There's a lot of grammatical errors.
Privilege. It's a privileged link. Where did you park?
I'm on West.
Alright.
I was wondering if you're actually driving.
Yes.
Hey, Roman.
I was gonna park out here.
Alright, still one examiner and one advisor. Short.
You've seen your advisor this morning.
I saw his automobile walking or driving into the garage, so I know he exists this morning.
So that's at least a positive indicator.
It's only 10 according to Verizon.
Verizon.
Well, I mean, 10 is the starting time.
Well, Craig has never shown up at the start.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a counter on here telling me, how much time. That'll start when the talk starts. I forgive everybody if you're here up until 11. If you want to mess with the illumination, please. I don't know how to work it. If you know how to work it, 'cause all I can do is all the way on or all the way off.
Because I thought we decided on the opposite of this configuration.
Oh yeah, we did. You're right. That is correct. Yeah, actually, how did I do that?
Oh, nice.
Are we gonna have every time there's new people come in, they'll play again?
All right, so just one examiner now. Hey, Craig.
Hey, how's it going, Josh?
Good.
John,
Hey, Greg.
you're working here again. I like it. That's great.
This is vacation.
Oh, no. We got work for you.
Thanks for coming, Barry.
You're welcome. Thanks for dressing up.
Wait, who's the other?
Jim.
Jim.
Yeah.
Oh,
When he comes, I think we can begin.
Jim has to find this place, right? Does he know where it
I
is?
sent explicit directions to Wale and Jim. So.
Maybe next time we should paint a yellow line on the stairs so that people can follow it.
Yeah, this is.
I believe this is the first offense in the new building, so I guess this is bound to happen.
If you get that around, yeah.
I don't think Sheila's around, so.
Thank you.
Let's have a little look-see.
All right.
Good.
If you want a seat at the table, I think there is one left.
It's
So
over
I-
there.
There's a seat here. One there, 3 chairs.
Ooh,
Is
Next
there
lesson.
No, of course, the screen is gone.
I know.
Wait, is there some paperwork from Jill?
I have the paperwork here.
Okay.
All right.
All right, well, should we get started here?
Yeah.
You ready to go? I guess let's close the door there. So, hi, everybody.
Oh,
what is
it's
this?
behind there. That I need
Okay.
those as well. There you go.
Okay, we'll sort this out. Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. This is Josh Spechler. Josh is presenting us his final public oral. I hate the sound of that final public oral. It sounds so, like,
It may be the
final, but
First of many public
first of many public orals.
No, please, no.
The first of many public orals from Josh. So Josh has been with us now for the past 5.5 years or so, and he came to us. First, he was at Brown University, where he got his bachelor's degree, and then he spent a couple years working at the Jet Propulsion Lab before he joined us here at Princeton. And since then, he's been working on a number of different projects, mostly related to laser processing of materials, generally defined. He's going to be talking to us today about some particular work he's done on silver nanowire networks, but even beyond that, Josh has been, very helpful for a number of projects around the lab. Everything from machining holes in polymers for some bio studies we were doing with some folks in chemistry, to doing some polymer design and things, working with Jake in our group. But all along, really, his main focus has been on these transparent conducting layers. So without any further ado, Josh, please tell us what you have to say.
All right, thank you so much, Craig. It's exciting to be here giving my FPO. This is a day that every grad student, I guess, looks forward to, dreads in some ways. But I'll also mention at the beginning, so I have my computer streaming this on YouTube, and I'm controlling the computer with my phone, so it's a little bit of a house of cards, but, so nobody shake the table too hard. But today I'll be talking to you about kind of the main focus of my thesis, which is laser processed silver nanowire network transparent conductors, and some of the great applications that we've put into these. So we can start by a very, very basic introduction. Transparent conducting materials. These are materials that you can see through. So you see this glass slide. You can see the grid paper underneath. You hook up a simple circuit, an LED, and it lights up. So it not only is see-through, it's conducting DC electricity. These materials are typically quantified with a couple relevant metrics. The sheet resistance, now this is the in-plane resistance of your transparent layer. You measure it with a 4-point probe directly. And the optical transparency, this is the transmission in the visible part of the electromagnetic spectrum. So there's a little bit of biology in there too. We call them transparent because of our eyes and where our eyes see. We measure this with a UV visible spectrometer, spectrophotometer, things like that. And also to give you a sense of typical great numbers, if you have 10 ohms per square at 90% transparent, you're good for almost any application you could dream up. But as you're looking at these things and maybe thinking about what are transparent things, what are conductive things, you'll notice that these aren't very common materials because we kind of have a physical reason why these things don't coexist often. DC electricity is mitigated through free charge carriers. Optical transparency or optical conduction is mitigated through non-interactions. So we want something that interacts and doesn't interact at the same time. However, these materials are all over today. I would venture to guess that everybody has a transparent conductor in their pocket because these things are in flat panel displays and they're in touch sensors. Additionally, they're in solar cells, and also this is a organic light-emitting diode panel lighting. And that looks a little strange. You'd wonder why I would pick that one. That's a real OLED panel lighting that you can go out and buy at the Home Depot. All of these things rely heavily on materials that can let light pass but carry a DC current. And all of these things today, for the most part, use what are known as transparent conducting oxides. Now these are degenerately doped wide bandgap semiconductors. Wide bandgap to let optical frequencies pass, degenerately doped to have some mobile charge carriers available. And the champion system is indium tin oxide. Now indium tin oxide is indium oxide, 10% doped with tin. And typically the way you would make your transparent conductor is kind of make a ceramic puck out of this mixture of powders, and then do something like sputtering, where we could put it in high vacuum, bombard it with argon ions, have our mixture of indium oxide, tin oxide, leave the target, deposit on a substrate, usually coupled with some sort of high temperature anneal to get a pristine layer. Now, of course, these TCOs come with a host of challenges. And this is kind of our reason for being here, are the challenges with TCOs. So first is that very vapor deposition. It makes it costly and difficult to scale. If I want a meter square transparent conducting oxide, I need a meter square vacuum oven and sputtering machine. As well, they're brittle, and this is mostly because to have an excellent substrate for these things for high temperature and high vacuum and inexpensive, we just use glass most of the time. The glass that's backing your transparent conducting oxide is one of the reasons why when you drop your phone, it does this. It shatters. It's one of the last materials in an optical display that is needantly brittle. I was reading an article that said that an average phone lasts 10 weeks before it's damaged in some way. And this is the most common way to damage your phone. I don't know if I believe that exactly, but another article, which I do believe, says this happens on average every 2 years. You drop your phone. And you talk to people in here. I mean, I did it about 2 years ago now. I'm sure everybody in here at least knows somebody who's done that. Another drawback of TCOs, which is maybe a little less obvious, is that the transmission window, your optical transmission, is bounded by a plasma frequency, which is kind of a collective oscillation of the free carriers, and a band gap, right? We're in a wide band gap semiconductor, so you push that plasma frequency to the red of the band gap. Now, if I want to make a more conductive wide band gap semiconductor, I can dope it even more heavily. What I'm doing is pushing that plasma frequency more towards the wavelengths that I start to cut off. I start to cut off and narrow my transmission window. So we have a linked conductivity and transparency. A final drawback I'll just mention is indium is 100% imported to the country. We don't mine it in America. It's kind of a costly metal at $700 a kilogram. And the main use of indium is ITO. This is the main use. Another interesting tidbit on this slide is in 2015, the most internet traffic for the first time comes from phones and not computers. Phones are a personal device. Everybody has one. If everybody wants a phone, this market is just accelerating. So we're going to focus today on these two challenges. The challenges of vapor deposition, high temperature anneal, and the mechanical issues that come with requiring glass. And these challenges are all to say that if we want kind of niche applications, we need alternative materials. And these are some niche applications: printed, flexible, wide bandpass, and low temperature. These are some of the things that researchers are interested in that the transparent conducting oxides are not well suited for. So the alternative we'll be discussing today are the metal nanowire networks. And you can kind of think of them as coming in two flavors, but really what we have here is a composite material. We're material scientists in Craig's lab, and we have a composite material where the metal is doing the conduction. The spaces in between the metal is allowing the optical transparency. So we have orderly and random, but again, what we want to overcome these challenges are a scalable fabrication process, something inherently flexible, with no spectral features in the visible. With the orderly, typically you'll have to fabricate that, again, in a vacuum process, some sort of deposition, vapor phase deposition. And then spectral features are another thing to think about. If you have an orderly metal grid, diffractive features can creep in. You can enhance wavelengths while suppressing others. You can also have things like moire interference, so physical spacings in your devices interfering. So for those reasons, we focus on random nanowire networks, and in contrast to the vapor deposition, we start with nanowires in solution phase, and we can use a whole host of solution phase processing to go from an ink to a layer. Now again, we need an interconnected layer because the silver is doing the conduction here, so we need a percolating layer, it's called, where we have connections in the nanowires allowing long-range conductivity. At this point, you might be wondering, well, I said metal nanowire networks, why do they have to be silver? So I could naively say that silver is the most conductive metal at room temperature, but if you look at the four most conductive metals at room temperature, there's some nice alternatives up there, especially when you look at cost, right? The contrast here isn't great. If you can't see it, silver is $250 a pound, aluminum 68 cents a pound. And this really, what we're tracking is abundance, right? This is the abundance in the Earth's crust. There's way, way more aluminum, orders of magnitude more than silver. Silver comes back into favor, however, when we consider a couple physical aspects. First, silver and gold are our noble metals. They're more resistant to oxides and oxidation than copper and aluminum are. Silver will last maybe not as long as gold, but certainly much, much longer than copper and aluminum. Finally, and additionally, copper and gold, of course, have a yellowish hue. That's a visible absorptive resonance in the bulk copper, whereas silver and aluminum are colorless. And perhaps most importantly, we need a good way to make these things in a vat process where we can scale it easily. So when we kind of add in a couple more considerations, we see why silver is not only the system we employ, but widely employed throughout the literature. However, there are some challenges. So the first challenge, one that we'll come back to many times, is that narrow contact in your percolating layer between nanowires, nanowire-nanowire contact, is a source of resistance. It can lead to a very resistive, macroscopically, network. Next, we're physically putting, even though it's nanoscale, something that is cylindrical on a flat plane. This leads to poor adhesion. Right? You have these kind of line contacts at nanowires. This is an atomic force microscopy image, showing, as you would expect, I have 90 nanometer diameter wires. I get about a 90 nanometer protrusion when I measure a single wire, and 2 wires about double that. But in addition to poor adhesion, this also makes contacting these nanowires difficult, contacting to the downstream electronics, and it also gives you a surface roughness on the order of the nanowire diameter, which is unacceptable for some processes. There's also the issue that nanowires don't play well with high temperatures. Because of the nanoscale geometry, the melting point is far depressed from the bulk. You could think of it as the surface area to volume ratio. It's much, much higher in a nanowire than it is in a bar of silver. There also are not good comparative metrics of transparent conductors. It's not as easy just to say that I have a sheet of ITO and I have our silver nanowire network. They have the same sheet resistance and transparency. They're going to work the same. This is an issue that's addressed in the thesis, which is going around. We're not going to really cover it in the FPO today. And then there are kind of our known unknowns, things that we're not going to address here or in the thesis, but certainly are very active lines of research and topics, I'm sure, of theses themselves. Things like the chemical stability. There are issues like silver migration and sulfurization, which is an oxidative process. Interface mechanics and electronics. I have this here, but this is addressed in the thesis, but certainly that can be the topic of many PhD theses. Ink suspension stability, things like the fact that making these wires takes a lot of solvents, and physical uniformity of your nanoparticles in the inks. All right, this brings me to the outline slide. And luckily, we're done with the first part. So the introduction is finished, and kind of where we're going to go today is first we're going to talk about a laser welding process, apply it to a real device, a photovoltaic device. Then we're going to talk about using these nanowires in a completely different system, a conductive polyimide, and then we'll discuss the real device that came from that line of work, which is a light-emitting diode device. So kind of where the Craig Arnold lab comes to this issue and problems surrounding silver nanowire networks is we want to see if we can address the increasing contact between nanowires with our laser. And a little bit of motivation comes from 2008, people started looking at silver nanowire networks for transparent electrodes. They saw you put it in an oven, the conductivity goes up, resistance goes down. This was done, mainly by two groups, Stanford and Trinity College Dublin. In maybe a few years later, it was found that mechanical pressure, mechanical treatments can also increase the conductivity. So that makes you think it really is increasing contact between nanowires. It's not that the oven is driving off residues of solvents. Interestingly, there's some nice Princeton connections here. I think Professor Liu and Peter Poymans were both graduate students here. So when I came to Princeton, we asked, can we use a laser to replace the furnace as a way of providing the energy to weld the nanowires together. Why it would be excellent to use a laser is it's expeditious. The laser transfer of energy can be much faster than an oven. It's direct write. We can process areas that we wish, whereas an oven you have to put your whole device in. And we wonder, can it be a resonant process? And we ask that because if you look at the absorptance spectrum of a dense silver nanowire network, now we use a very dense network here to kind of pronounce features, but if you look at this absorbance spectrum, we see a nice absorptive resonance in the UV, right? It's outside of the visible. We want these things to be transparent to visible. But we see this nice resonance near a very common laser line. Now, in the Arnold lab, we've got at least 4 lasers that can access this line. So that's why this is exciting to us. We want to know, can we use this laser wavelength to do the process? And the first thing we can do is some optical simulations. So this is a finite difference time domain. It solves Maxwell's equations in a 3-dimensional space. So we define our materials, crossing silver cylinders on top of glass. We send in monochromatic light, and we keep propagating the waves until a steady state is reached. And we look at intensity enhancement. So if we had uniform intensity in, we look at where that intensity ended up. Do any of these structures act like antennas? And what we see is precisely at the junction between nanowires, we get an intensity enhancement. Now, this wasn't totally a pleasant surprise. We suspected this is what would happen because that area, that junction between nanowires, is a highly scattering area. When you have that high scattering, you tend to be able to trade energy into the material, trade a photon for a plasma oscillation in your metal, or plasma. So we see, about a 10-fold increase in intensity. But as I mentioned, we have 4 of these lasers, so why don't we just do the experiment? We can look for direct evidence. So we can make nanowire networks and put them in an SEM, scanning electron microscope. And what we see is nanowire networks that are not laser processed, such as in A, have these well-defined sides and edges. In B and C, we start adding the laser, with B having a less energy density than C. And we start to see signs of interaction of the light with the silver cylinders. And we see evidence that nanowires have fused together. We also see at the ends of nanowires the silver balling up. The end of a nanowire is also a place where you would expect a lot of scattering, another high curvature. And of course in D, if we increase the laser energy density or the fluence much higher, we can definitely destroy nanowire networks. No problem doing that. So this is the direct measurement, but perhaps we're more interested in actually the indirect measurement, which would be measuring the sheet resistance before and after this process. So if we make a lot of nanowire networks, and in my 6 years, I don't even want to think about how many nanowire networks I've made. We go and we measure sheet resistance before, put it under the laser, and measure that same device, that same sample again. We can report a ratio of final to initial surface resistance as a function of laser fluence. That's the energy density again. And now the black dots are that data set, the resistance data set. And what we see is we can have up to an 80% enhancement, so have a final resistance that's 20% of the initial resistance, in kind of an optimal processing range of maybe 20 to 50 millijoule per centimeter square, which is actually a relatively low dosage of laser radiation. For good measure, we can also track the optical transmission of these devices. We don't expect to see a change from the laser processing. And what we see is exactly that. So our 0 line for the red data here, no change to optical transmission within the error bars until we get to very high laser fluences. What we're doing there is removing material with the laser. We're ablating with the laser, and we don't want to do that either. So really this describes, say, 20 to 40 millijoule per centimeter square optimal processing. To get a sense of absolute values for this study, we used very dense nanowire networks, things that are only transmitting about 55 to 70% of light. So it's a very dense coating. However, that leads to high initial surface resistances in the 10 to 30 range, dropping down to 5 to 10 after laser processing. So the squares here are after the processing. So that's the laser process, and we're going to move on now to ask, can we use this laser process in a real device? And what we'll aim to do is answer two questions. First, can we improve the performance or the efficiency of a real solar cell with this process? And second, because we have a resonant, gentle process, can we perform it on top of a completed device without damaging it? This is the device we'll be using. It's probably very familiar to Professor Sturm. I worked closely with his lab to do this part of my thesis research. Results published in ACS, Applied Materials and Interfaces. It's a hybrid organic-inorganic heterojunction solar cell. Here's our side view of the material system. The heterojunction is N-type silicon with P.PSS, acting as an electron blocking layer, hole injection layer. When we don't use nanowires, what we would use is a vapor deposited bus bar and finger electrode as our top, an aluminum cathode. Here again, there's our side, and here's a picture of the energetics and the band structure in operation, showing the role of our heterojunction. And because the top layer next to the transparent electrode is an organic semiconductor, it's sensitive to high temperatures. That's why ITO can't be employed in this scheme. ITO typically requires a high temperature anneal. So we couldn't put this thing in a vacuum chamber and sputter ITO onto it. So right now they use a bus bar and finger grid. This is kind of the processing scheme. The P-dot is spun onto the wafer, and then physical vapor deposition for the metal contacts. A typical bus bar on these will shadow about 15% of your device. That means 50% of your area is thrown away. We're not using that to collect sunlight. Our challenge is to use silver nanowires to get more light into the device, pulling more current out of the device. Our challenge is not introducing resistive losses. Resistive now in plane or across the plane. We propose this sort of processing scheme where we start again with spin coating the P.PSS, our organic semiconductor. Then we'll spray coat the silver nanowires. We're going to still have a physical vapor deposition step, mostly for the back electrode, but also have a contact point for testing. So we'll put a contact bar on. Then we'll use our laser. And this is a picture of what a device looks like after it's been made. Before we make devices, there's some salient pre-testing that needs to be done. So the laser processing I discussed just a moment ago deals with nanowires on glass. Now we have nanowires on P.PSS, slightly different system. So what we can do is, again, make a variety of nanowire networks. Here we're as a function of area coverage of nanowires, and we track the sheet resistance before and after the laser process. Important also to note on this plot, we have a point at 0% area coverage. That's only P.PSS. So this is to verify that the laser process isn't doing anything to the sheet resistance of our sensitive organic semiconductor. We can then look at these devices in terms of their transparency. Again, the devices, it's reported as area coverage. We can look at transparency in two different ways. Specular, which is kind of what we associate as transparency, how well we can see through a device. And total, which also counts up diffuse transmission. So scattering events that scatter forward through our layers can be counted through total transmission. And what we see is while the specular only maybe tracks very well with the area coverage, the total can be a little bit above. Those scattering events can favor us. And of course, in a solar cell, we don't care how those photons get in, whether it's specular or scatters through. So those green dots are really what we should be looking at. Important to notice here that the lowest area coverage of nanowires leads to our most dramatic change from the laser process. So we're going to approach this problem by making a purposefully bad device, bad in terms of area coverage, laser process it over a range of fluences to try to optimize our laser variable. Again, here's our scheme now with labeled where we're going to test. So we're going to add the nanowires, add the contacts, and we'll test it once. Then do the laser process, test it again. Let me briefly mention what I mean by testing it. We're going to be doing a JV characteristics of our solar cell. So here's two different ones, a yellow and a blue for comparison. We'll be reporting things like short circuit current. So we would say maybe the blue has a better short circuit current, it's pulling out more current. Open circuit voltage, where the yellow has a lower open circuit voltage, but then power conversion efficiency, which is kind of our maximum power we can get out. Again, power is kind of our x times f of x here, if you will. So it's our current times our voltage, we get a power density. And our fill factor, and our fill factor is a geometric factor that relates the open circuit voltage, the short circuit current, to the power conversion efficiency. The power conversion efficiency is going to tell us, did we improve the device? The short circuit current, for the most part, is going to tell us, is the electrode more transparent? Are we getting more light? Light causing current. The open circuit voltage will tell us something about whether we messed up these internal electronics. And the fill factor is going to tell us something about whether we added resistance. And again, this is what we're afraid of, is adding resistance. So if we look at this purposely bad device that we expect to see large changes, in fact we do. So if we track those metrics which I just discussed, we see a clear region where we have great enhancement to our short circuit current and our power conversion efficiency. So we can use this information to prescribe an optimal processing of, say, 15 to 25 millijoule per centimeter square. And now we've answered one of our questions that we sought out to answer, is can we do this on another, can we do our laser process on an otherwise completed solar cell? And yes, right here we have, and we've actually made this already bad device perform much, much better. You know, we're reaching almost 50% enhancement to efficiency. So let's see what happens when we apply to a more optimized device. So if we do 3 levels of nanowire, kind of a high, medium, low, 6% area coverage, 16 and 25, we see different behavior going on. The 6%, we take a very bad device, we make it better, but it's still not great. In the very high area coverage, we have a really good device to begin with. Laser doesn't do much. Actually, we're happy about that. We don't want the laser hurting the device. So it's nice that we have a good device that stays good. Really, the point of the publication, the champion here, is that we can take a device that's pretty good and make it act like an excellent device. You know, using less nanowires, we can make it act as if it had more nanowires there. You'll also see we get a little more short circuit current, right, because we're more transparent there. So there's tables of values reported in the thesis. These are values for all of those metrics that we discussed. Really, the take-home point here is that in the medium coverage batch, we took something with a mean of 7.3% power conversion efficiency, brought it to 9.2. In our best device, we got something like a 26% power conversion efficiency in our optimized system. Of course, in the low system, we can report numbers like 50% enhancements, but in a relevant system, a very nice increase. And we can use less nanowires, is a nice point to take home as well, and make a device that acts like it has way more. So kind of summarizing up this section, we've answered these 2 questions. We said, can we use the laser process to improve efficiency in a solar cell? Yes. We do right here. We see the same exact device before and after laser processing. Can we do it on an otherwise completed device without damaging it? Yes. So you saw that with the high device. You see that here. You see it in all the devices. Another thing to remember and a point to harp on here is that this is not a brand X comparison. I'm not saying that we took a batch of devices and had a laser process. We took a batch of devices that didn't, and we compared them at the end. This is a measurement. We took the device, measured it, then we put it under the laser, and we measured it again. So let's change lanes a little bit and talk about some of the unique difficulties we're going to encounter moving from the photovoltaic study to the OLED study. So the PV project, as we just discussed, was fruitful. It proved, some of the things we were setting out to prove, that we can use this laser process in a fab. But in many ways, it was well suited to using nanowires. If you remember way back to the slide on drawbacks of silver nanowires, we really only had to overcome one here, which was the narrow contact between nanowires. We didn't care about surface roughness. We didn't care about adhesion, and because we had that PVD contact point, we didn't care really about contacting downstream electronics. We kind of heavy-handedly just added a contact. So we had a good idea going in also that silver would be a fine material because silver was what was used as the bus bar and finger. So energetics, things like changing our Schottky barrier between the metal and the active layers, weren't really thought about. Didn't have to think about it. Here we have a different beast. This is our organic light emitting diode. And if we see, we have many complex, long-named organic molecules in a highly engineered stack. We have some inorganics thrown in there just for fun. The layers between the anode and cathode here are drawn to scale. But the take-home here is we have many vapor-deposited layers. And our transparent electrode, our anode, is the substrate for all of these vapor-deposited layers, culminating in a PVD aluminum cathode, aluminum with the lithium fluoride injection layer. In this device, currently, ITO is used as our anode, as our substrate for the deposition of all of these layers. So therefore, in contrast to the PV experiment where we were trying to be better than a bus bar and finger, here really we're taking a swing at the champ. Here we're going after ITO in the name of can we make a flexible device. In the solar cell we wanted to improve performance. Here, if the performance is the same but we have a flexible device, we'll be happy. I'll give it a little bit away. We're going to have a better device at the end. But and the work here is a topic of a paper from this year, Advanced Functional Materials. We were lucky enough to get a journal cover. And Professor Barry Rand's lab was instrumental in getting this work done. It wouldn't have happened without his lab and his students. So let's begin. We're going to say we want to use silver nanowire networks to replace ITO. The first problem we encounter is that vapor deposition requires a flat substrate. As I've said many times, those things aren't flat. That's about 100 nanometer or more RMS surface roughness. You can't make a device on the nanowires just sitting on top of a rigid substrate. We could be a little more quantitative here and do atomic force microscopy to verify our findings. This is an image that we saw earlier. Luckily, there's a common solution to this problem in the literature, a solution that we're going to employ, which is to embed the nanowires in a polymer layer. Solution processable polymers can accommodate this roughness. Now, it's important to be in solution phase when we process because we want the polymer to kind of encapsulate all this roughness. The process kind of looks as follows. We'll make a silver nanowire network on a rigid substrate, say glass, a wonderful material. Then we'll encapsulate with a polymer. It says colorless polyimide there, but it works with a whole range of polymers, polystyrene, acrylics, PVDC, saran wrap, PVDF. Then we dry the polymer, which was in solution phase. Now it's a solid. We hope and pray that this polymer detaches from the glass, and we hope and pray that the buried interface there has the nanowires held against a flat, interface now. It'll be conductive. So this solution takes our AFM that was showing hundreds of nanometers RMS, and in this one simple step, we go from hundreds of nanometers RMS to possibly single nanometer. So this is what the nanowires look like embedded in a polymer. We see maybe a 2 nanometer bump now around a nanowire, and junctions now go into our surface instead of out. This solution, of course, leads to problem 2. Problem 2 is that polymers have a low index of refraction, and the active organic layers in our device have a high index of refraction. This is the list I gave you on the last slide, works with these materials. Well, if we look at the index of refraction for these materials, say we're around 1.5. What I'm getting at here is that when you create your light in a random dipole in the organic media, you've really restricted the wave vectors which will outcouple. You have this large region, whereas if you emit light with these certain vectors, it will be in a natural waveguide between the organic layers and the inorganic, and the polymer layers, also organic. Take-home point is that a refractive index of 1.7 can outcouple 75% more light than one with 1.4, and we're holding way too many things constant, so Barry might laugh at that statement, but it is true if we hold all these things constant. So our solution for problem 2 comes in the form of polyimides. Our famous polyimide, Kapton, our representative from DuPont here is going to be upset I don't have a circle R next to Kapton. It's a registered trademark of DuPont. Has an index of refraction in the visible of 1.7, what we're hoping for. And that's about as good as you can get with plastics. And also for free with polyimides, we get great things like chemical stability, thermal stability, and mechanical stability. Sorry, mechanically robust as well. So, this is really a great system to be used as a substrate in flexible electronics. And, many people use this as a substrate for flexible circuits. However, solution 2, of course, leads to problem 3. Problem 3, the polyimides aren't transparent. If you remember that picture that was just on the screen, it has that characteristic amber hue. That's how you know you're using Kapton, or polyimide. So, the solution to problem 3 is to make our own colorless polyimide. So if I give away some trade secrets here, this is how you make Kapton. All polyimides really are a condensation of a dianiline moiety and a dianhydride moiety, the dianiline being the top one here. These things polymerize in a downhill reaction, and then you add heat, you make a polyimide. Again, not very transparent as it looks. It has been suggested in the literature that fluorinated and semi-alicyclic moieties would lead to greater transparency in the visible. So,
you need a 100 nanometer layer.
What was that?
You need a 100 nanometer layer.
Well, maybe I should clarify. The goal really here is to make a substrate and an electrode. So anytime we add more layers, we have to think about the index of refraction, right? So we have to be worried about that total transparency. So really what we'd like to do is just use one material for our substrate and our electrode. So what we end up having is something more in the tens of micron layer, where this becomes unacceptable in transmission. True, if I just wanted to encapsulate the wires and just wanted that one layer, yeah, you could definitely get away with Kapton, because the absorption is going to be negligible in 100 nanometers. However, then the next layer next to the Kapton has to step down or index match and things like that. We just have a nesting doll problem. So we're going to say, let's have our electrode be impregnated right into our substrate. But very good point. So as I was saying, fluorinated and semi-alicyclic moieties have been suggested to increase our optical transmission. So we settle on this after quite a bit of searching through many moieties. Jake and Carl here were very, very helpful, letting me use their air-free setup to make these things. But this one has a fluorinated dianiline. We see how it looks in solution, and because it's very thin, you can't even tell it's there on here, but there is a sheet of our transparent polyimide, our colorless polyimide. This is the proposed chemical structure. We see our imide group, and we can kind of recognize where the dianiline and dianhydride moiety went to. More salient, of course, are the indirect measurements. What we're interested in is index of refraction. We see we're well above 1.6 through the visible. And if we kind of look at the normalized transmission of this versus Kapton, we've moved this elbow of transmission to include more blue wavelengths, giving us the measurement you see with your eyes there.
What's the last transition coverage?
Interestingly, what I've found, so we haven't measured it, but what I've found through the literature for things like this and polyimides in general, they degrade before a glass transition. So, you could think of it as 400C. I mean, they have the excellent thermal stability of being a polyimide, and that goes into it. So, glass transition's kind of a hairy point when you talk about polyimides. So, problem 4, of course, arises from solution 3, which is the high temperature required to make a polyimide. Right? So, the proposed structure I said was for the solid. When it's in solution, it actually looks like this, which is a polyamic acid, and that's why it can be dissolved with a solution before curing, but after curing chemically, it's rock solid. You're closing this nitrogen ring here. And what we found is that this requires a cure of 360 degrees for 20 minutes. And there's a very nice study recently published of the thermal properties of nanowires. And we see these were taken after 10-minute hold at these temperatures. 300, it's barely surviving. At 380, we've completely broken up our tubes into droplets. This is a nice demonstration of the Rayleigh plateau instability for any of the fluids people who happen to be in the audience. We have a cylinder that becomes a liquid. It wants to be uniform droplets.
Is this for the same diameters you're using?
Really good question. I believe these are 70 nanometer, and it is extremely diameter dependent. I've been trying to find you in your office to talk about our issues with new diameter nanowires. So let's kind of review for a second. We need the silver nanowires for conductivity. We need solution phase processing to mitigate the surface roughness. And we need polyimides for the index of refraction. So we need to add a new material is our solution to problem 4. So in the literature, it has been shown that adding thin metal oxide shells to the nanowires can increase chemical stability. We sought to ask whether this can increase thermal stability. The nice thing about these thin metal oxide layers is they have little to no effect on the macroscopic transparency or resistance of the networks. So we can see we're adding tiox or titania thin nanoshells from a solution process. When this titania is not there on our nanowires, the 20-minute at 360 leads to a broken up network that would not conduct electricity in the plane. This is zoomed in. When we do add the tiox, we definitely see signs that the thermal treatment's affecting the nanowires. However, the junctions are intact, and the more salient measurement, the sheet resistance, is still there. They're still conductive. So we have in place now a process for which we can move on to discuss the device, which will be the end. We're going to spray coat our nanowires, titania sol gel, add our colorless polyimide in solution phase. Then we're going to do our imidization, our high temperature cure, lift it off, and we can create patterns by using a shadow mask. We can insert our laser process right there, and what's nice about inserting the laser process at that point is we know how to process nanowires on glass like the back of our hand, right? It's the first thing we did in 2012. It's our bread and butter. We don't have to worry about any of the other materials when we do the laser process. That's a win for us. And what we get are these robust, conductive, colorless, conductive polyimides. We can show they're mechanically robust by doing a common test, which would be repeated bending of a strip of this material while measuring the resistance. And if we do the comparison to silver nanowires coated on top of a flexible substrate like PET, we see the conductive polyimide is basically rock solid because the nanowires are being held there. When the nanowires are on top of a flexible substrate, of course, you have the adhesion issues we talked about. So about 100 cycles. It's the inset. So much better. I also have access to an Instron machine, so why not make a dog bone of this material and pull it apart? And we can show kind of what we found, that they're not very stretchable. That I can get an elongation of about 5%, but because we have a percolative network, which is mitigating our conduction, the resistance starts going off even before failure. Yeah, Barry.
Is the failure there due to the polyimide or the silver nanowire?
The silver nanowires fail first, then the polyimide. But if you think of it as a composite material, you could say that the strain at which conduction goes away is lower than the strain at which this thing breaks in half. So let's move on to our real device. So here's compact representations of those long, ugly organic names I had in the slide where we introduced it. And now we're going to, as I said, challenge the champion transparent conductor, ITO. Our control device is ITO on glass. That device is going to be about 750 microns thick. That's the glass, most of it. If we replace that now with our transparent polyimide, which we can use again as the electrode and the substrate. We have about 20 microns thick. That's limited by difficulty of processing, as Kyung and before her Taewook know. If we get thinner, it becomes very hard to handle and test these things, but we can certainly do it easily. And what we'll be looking at this time are similarly JV characteristics. Now we have a log plot, and this is a cartoon model. It's not going to look like this, right? We have many, many different voltage drops and turn-ons and interfaces in here, but if it was just a simple diode, that's what we'd see. And then luminance, which is measuring the light out with a calibrated silicon photodiode. So this is what we see when we compare our control device with the ITO to our test structure. What we see from the JV characteristics is that the silver nanowires are more resistive. At a given voltage, you get less current through. However, the luminance, which is not a log plot, it's linear, is not that much depressed. So while it's more resistive, this doesn't really show us whether we made a better or worse device. In a solar cell, you never want resistance. In a light-emitting diode, we need another processing step. And what we can plot here is our current efficacy. I had it on the screen before. Sorry for not introducing it. But that's our luminous intensity per unit current, candela per amp in SI. And what we see is while the nanowires are more resistive, per unit current, you get way more light out of the nanowire device. In fact, 60% more at 6 volts. With the benefit of being flexible, so inset here is the device being bent in half, which you definitely could not do on the ITO devices. So let's just take a minute to kind of understand why we get a better device from a more resistive electrode. We have a work function difference now because we're not comparing silver to silver like in the solar cell, but we have ITO to silver. We have more of a barrier to hole injection here. So that's going to lead to that resistance. However, if we think about charge balance, which is kind of restricting the charge flow to get more of an ideal rate to suppress loss mechanisms that could be there with a higher amount of positive charge carriers in our device, we could actually posit that perhaps the charge balance is better when using this energetic structure rather than ITO. The addition of the p-dot layer is going to add some series resistance as well. Another area of enhancement is that this problem we discussed, the outcoupling, and not into a wave-guided mode, certainly holds for our planar interfaces when we use ITO. When we have nanowires here, the reason you can see where the nanowires are here is because they're hazy, they're scattering, they're physical structure there. And now we have a chance to recover light if it hits this interface, even at an angle which should be wave-guided because we don't have a nice interface anymore. We can have a scattering event which can help us recover that light. Any talk like this wouldn't be complete without showing you a movie of the device lighting up while being bent in half, so let's play that movie for you. This is our green phosphorescent OLED built on about 20 micron thick substrate with electrode from silver nanowires. If you notice right there, it's looping. There's a point where a second device turns on. Taewook's hand slips, contacts 2 devices there. I love that point, right? Because it shows that our yield is not 1. But it's actually important to mention. When one device works, typically the whole sample will work. Most of these devices will turn on, which is very favorable, or it's a very nice thing to know if these are ever going to be mass produced. Usually, if one doesn't work, none of them work. But if one works, you have a good chance of a very high yield.
Is this in a glove box?
This is in a glove box. Yeah, that's those big black gloves that I'm sure you're familiar with. So let me conclude by restating some of our main accomplishments. First, we developed the laser process to resonantly weld the nanowire-nanowire junctions, which drastically increases the conductivity of these transparent conductors. With this process, we made many very high quality, in terms of sheet resistance and transparency, nanowire networks. We've also integrated this process into the fabrication of a photovoltaic device on top of an otherwise completed device showing improvements to efficiency. Moving on, we developed a mechanically, thermally, chemically robust substrate and electrode for vapor-deposited organic electronics. And we showed the example of an OLED device built upon this composite material, which can outperform an ITO control by 60% in terms of current efficacy. I want to briefly acknowledge the Arnold group. I like this picture. This is from my first semester in the group. Roman is the last person who's still there besides me. We have John here with us today. The Sturm group, in particular, Sushoban and Ken, both of whom are now long gone, which were instrumental to the PV side. The RAN group, Teuk. Teuk and I will be working together again, hopefully someday. And Kyung, who have been helping with the OLED project. I'll thank my readers, Dan Steingart, Barry Rand, Barry is here, and the examiners, Professor Sobiejo and Professor Sturm. Some funding, but I'll put the conclusions back up and we can move on to some questions.
All right, thank you, Josh. We'll take some questions now. Since this is an open thing, certainly questions from the audience is welcomed. So,
Roman.
So, Josh, do you have an idea why the titanium dioxide is protecting the wire?
Yeah, I mean the
make a shell like a hard shell.
yeah, that's the best theory is that we have a hard shell, titania, which is kind of maybe acting like a straw around water. I mean, if you think of it more technically, maybe about altering the local chemical potential. But physically, you could probably think of it as a hard shell. I don't think that's a bad analogy. Yeah.
Have you done any cross-sectional TEM?
We have not. There are papers in the literature that we follow closely to make these hard shells that when we replicate their process, they measured a 2 nanometer shell. So that's what we kind of expect that we have. We have not.
questions from the audience? If not, John?
Do you have a sense for what dominates the resistance in here? Is it conduction through the nanowires or an interfacial resistance between nanowires and whatever?
Yeah, no, it's certainly both, but I mean it depends on where we're looking, right? If we're trying to quantify just the electrode, we quantify the resistance in the plane, where we have ohmic contact between our nanowires, and we want to take a charge from over there in the device and move it to the downstream electronics. Certainly, if we're trying to use this layer in a system where it's not appropriate, you can build in potential drops or resistances, across the plane. Whenever you have a metal contacting semiconductor or otherwise, you'll have these fields. So it really depends on the electrode we make. I can make you an electrode that's limited by junctions. I can make you an electrode that's limited by transport through the nanowires. So it's we in the thesis, if you want to see, we dive into it a little bit in terms of simulation, and it shows what I just said there. You have a range of useful electrodes where the dominant resistance mechanism can be either.
So there's a lot of companies out there that sell you a silver wire hoop, like Cambrios and things like that. What do they do?
So
go out of business. No.
Yeah, I'm sad to announce that Cambrios filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy just a week ago. And in my thesis, I do praise them as a company that.
Right, but what's different from?
So yeah, Cambrios' focus is.
What do they get in terms of ohm per square? They
right.
have a different chemical trick.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely. So Cambrios specs 10 ohms per square at about 95% transparency. So excellent. Beats ITO hands down. Their magic is in their ink. Of course, it's all patented, but this is from talking to a Cambrios representative at a conference. It's dispersive additives and adhesive additives. Dispersive additives gives you shelf life on your ink. Adhesive additives make it easy to deposit. I guess it's a third thing I should mention also. It's the nanowire geometry. Really, right now, you want the longest, thinnest nanowires. We're not really near a range where the size of the nanowire is going to add to resistance. At some scale, when we shrink the nanowire down, quantum effects will come in and transport effects will come in, increasing resistance. But we're not that close to that resistance. So they use very long, thin nanowires. What that also does is lowers your haze. So you have a very nice looking electrode. You see really the total transmission through.
But in terms of the junctions,
Yeah, so that
you have a laser process.
Yeah.
That's a key issue.
That's their adhesive additives. They say makes it so it doesn't need to be post-processed. They recommend a furnace anneal, but not at relevant temperaters for.
This is the public specs I've seen. I see 10 ohms per square, but I never see the optical transparency associated 10 ohms per square. I see that with like the 100 ohms per square. So I really don't know what.
Yeah. I mean, their public specs are, or I should say, were 10 ohms per square at about 95% transparency. At the same time.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, we haven't made those here either, and I'm going to blame it on my nanowire geometry more than anything else. Because the adhesive additives and the dispersive additives help for shelf life and deposition, but those are the things just through trial and effort and labor I can get right. But certainly the numbers they report are different from the numbers I hit. Or maybe that's the reason they went under. I should say. I won't speculate. But yeah, unfortunately, Cambrios is no more. Jake.
One other question.
Sorry.
Regarding the light extraction in the OLEDs,
Mm-hmm.
can you comment on the, essentially you took a glass substrate and replaced it with a plastic substrate.
That's right. So yeah, I mean,
Does that affect that 60% plus or minus?
No, that's helping us for sure. We have a thinner interface there, and because we have a higher index in the glass, there's another waveguided, there's another waveguide there between the outside world and the glass.
Oh, I'm sorry. So those numbers there, those were on glass substrates?
So
Those
the
are
ITO, actually, I'm misspeaking. So let me back up. The ITO is on glass.
Correct.
And the glass is a lower index of refraction than the polyimide. The polyimide is freestanding, flexible when we measure it. So there's no glass there.
Your data was all on the plastic substrate with the high index.
That's correct. No glass when we measure. Which is part of the reason why it needs to be thick. As I mentioned, we're kind of limited on our thickness. We would like to be a little thinner for transparency, but we're limited on the thickness for what's feasible to handle and test. So 20 microns is a very skilled postdoc or graduate student can handle a 20 micron substrate. Jake?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, in terms of like potential scale up something like this, how quickly can you do the laser sintering process?
Ooh, that's a great question. So our laser process is limited right now kind of by our linear motion and our rep rate of our laser. So there are certainly lasers that can 100 kilohertz, megahertz, and if you can run that in a stable configuration, rastering along substrate, you could use our method in that sense. Probably what you'd want to do is use a much bigger beam than we use. So I didn't really harp home the point, but we use a macroscopic laser beam, and because the energy gets channeled to those junctions, we can use a big beam and raster it along the sample. We're not focusing the laser on the junction. Some people take that away from the talk. That's not what we're doing. It's a macroscopic beam causing microscopic changes. So maybe what we could do is have a laser that outputs more energy in each pulse, and we can make that beam spot bigger and increase the speed.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Lasers always scare people for a number of reasons, but for processing, right? Because they sound expensive. It sounds like you need a specialist to operate them, and in some sense, yeah, sure, we can keep that myth going that you need a laser specialist if you want to do a laser processing or manufacturing. But I can see that there are certainly issues that on a lab scale we have the luxury of not thinking about. Yeah.
Well, do you have some questions?
Yeah, sure. You teased me a bit at the beginning of your presentation by talking about interfacial mechanics.
I said that was one of our notes, but go ahead. Go ahead.
And so what insights did you get in terms of the role of interfacial mechanics in some of the systems?
Yeah, I would say, the first insight that comes to mind is it's easier and nicer when we can ignore it. So let me explain what I mean. So in the solar cell work, right? Because it's our last layer to the outside world, the silver nanowires. I don't have to worry about any sort of mechanical role of that interface. With the OLED work is totally different beast. So as I mentioned, we need to use polymer encapsulant for the surface roughness. That polymer, right, with the nanowires in it, has to be robust enough to stand up to deposition and then do our mechanical testing. So we kind of get for free all the beautiful things that come with a polyimide. However, we've tried things like polystyrene, which has a reasonable index of refraction. It's just too brittle, or it doesn't play nicely to encapsulate all the roughness of the nanowires. So the interfacial mechanics there really comes in when we need to peel it off from our glass, right? We need to know which side the nanowires are going to stay on. PDMS is great for a number of reasons for flexible electronics. It's optically clear. There are some methods in the literature to increase the index of refraction. So it might have been a promising candidate. PDMS comes off glass nicely, but it won't hold the nanowires. That's some of where we have to think about interfacial mechanics. But as I said, in my work, having to blame it because it's something that I don't go into depth on. But hopefully that satisfies some of your appetite for it. If you have a specific question, though.
It also made me more curious about adhesion.
Yeah.
You talked about sort of nanowire cylindrical geometries and adhesion. Mm-hmm. And I was intrigued by your thinking. Part of this is, geometry and adhesion, and part of it is more intrinsic.
Sure.
So could you give us some insights into what the issues were that led you to?
Yeah. What I meant there when I was talking about it is that, in contrast to a planar contact, so say a deposited silver film, the contact at a wire on top of a substrate is a line, right? So we could think of our surface energies as being altered. And that really is what I blame for the adhesion issues of why the nanowires don't adhere to anything. It doesn't really matter what substrate you start with in terms of surface energy, high or low, so hydrogen-terminated silicon or oxide-terminated silicon. It doesn't stick nicely on anything. And that's why these commercial companies have to add adhesives, probably organic molecules to the inks. Again, I do think that there's fruitful lines of research of, say, simulating these things, simulating your chemical environment around a line contact versus a plane. It's not something we look at.
But you've got a dirty surface, in a sense, when you're doing all of this.
That's correct, yeah.
So you really don't know what the heck you're sticking to, from my viewpoint.
That would make it a very difficult simulation, yes.
Yeah, I would.
Because the real-world analog, as you just pointed out, it's not just our nanowires, there's nanoparticles in there, and there's probably solvent residue.
And crud, which is ubiquitous.
Ubiquitous crud as well. So one of the main harping points that I put up in the beginning is that we make these electrodes in the lab atmosphere, we laser process them in the lab atmosphere, which sounds wonderful until you introduce ubiquitous crud. That makes me then jealous of people who do the vapor phase deposition because, they get the high purity. The vapor phase deposition people would look at me and go, no, do you know how often I have to refine my ingredients? And then if something goes wrong, I have no idea what the contaminant was. So, there might be a happy medium there, but, I get to have the benefits of working in the laboratory atmosphere that certainly come with the detriments of things like crud.
Could I ask you a question about an experiment that you vaguely flagged?
Sure.
You talked about making some funny-shaped device that I believe you tested at constant strain rate in tension. Is that right?
So, yeah,
and you mumbled something about the wires failing first and then the matrix.
That was mumbled.
How does that happen when you've got a random array of fibers?
So, what you'll see, so the experiment you're referring to is I made a piece of conductive polyimide, about 50 microns thick, maybe a little thicker than we'd use for a device. So it has nanowires at one surface. I used a laser to cut it into a dog bone shape just to try to ensure that the failure happened somewhere away from our contacts to our instron. And then
So you were grabbing it in.
I was grabbing it,
and-
with the tension at plions, and then we used constant strain rate, something like 0.33% per second, something like that. Not too fast, not too slow.
Room temperature.
Room temperature out in the uncontrolled atmosphere. And actually, to be perfectly honestly, probably our alignment wasn't great either. It's not impossible that we weren't pulling it straight up and down. So that was more to show that these networks are not, or this material that we created is not very stretchable. So yeah, it was a bit of a throwaway.
Why did you say the fibers silver?
So
first?
Yeah. What
were you measuring
see,
a resistivity while you were doing this? Or?
That's right. That's right.
So that's not a post.
Actually, a lot of these nanostructures are not very ductile.
Let me put this.
A lot of these nanostructures are not very ductile.
No, that's right.
So fundamentally, if you stretch them, they will tend to fail before.
Yeah, but you have a random array of, at least in 2 dimensions.
Here we go.
Fiber orientation.
Yes, we have a random array. So what
what
the
each
random
fiber is small compared to the length of the section
correct.
you were testing.
That's correct. So this is kind of our dog bone structure here.
Yeah.
So what I observed, I only ran about 5 of these. So certainly a more controlled experiment to characterize failure would be needed. However, what I observed somewhat repeatedly, and what I mentioned is that our resistance shoots up before our device breaks at about 6% elongation.
But you've got a yield process, presumably.
That's correct. So I guess you could say yes, it's failed.
What is yielding?
Yeah, sure. It is failed, but not fractured. So what we're saying is that after the yield, then the network at one of the surfaces starts to become disconnected. And we're measuring resistance, say, from here to here, while these 2 points are being held by our instron machine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think it's perfectly suitable then to say, to your point, yes, if I wanted to actually use this in something that needs to have some tolerance for being stretched, I want to be only in the elastic region, precisely, and you do maintain your resistance over that use period. It's what I was saying, maybe a little bit too glibly, was before fracture, the nanowires fail. But because you're in this stretchy matrix, because you're random, sure, in the elastic region, your resistance is rock solid. We did a test with one of these. It's not reported here. It's in the thesis, where I took it up to, I think, 2.5% elongation for 50 cycles. Saw no change in conductivity.
By that you mean you did 50, 0 to some
that is
level
correct.
thing.
And the 0.
And it wasn't, there was no hysteresis in your curve?
In the curve, no. I mean, we're kind of low down. I mean, there's a bit here. I guess it's starting out, but I might blame that on the machine.
But loading and unloading.
Loading and unloading,
down
right up in an elastic regime.
Curve
To my
accuracy of measure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, why?
So if you want to make something flexible, are the strains really that high?
Are the strains really that
We've
flexible?
basically done a tensile test where you're
That's correct.
applying direct axial loading.
Yeah.
But actually, when you bend these structures, are the strains that high?
Well, because they're so thin, they don't have to be. So I think a lot of this is accommodated by it being very thin. If we have a thick chunk of polyimide, sure, it would probably fracture.
So actually, for bending, your strains would be much less because of your geometry.
He's also got an asymmetric sample, so his neutral axis is ill-defined.
Still, your strains would be
For
low.
the bending.
Still
That's
the
right.
strains would be low
The
because
neutral
they scale
axis.
with the distance from the neutral axis.
Sure.
So essentially, the bending problem is more
1 millimeter. Which
Yeah, well, the implication of what he said was that the fibers were on the outside. So wherever the neutral axis is, they're either in tension large or they're in compression.
And to your point that the fibers are on the outside, when we do this, we're actually bending to an S shape. So we have that surface in tension and compression. S shape to 1 millimeter bend radius, which was John's question. Aaron.
The end where you were talking about the performance of the OLED.
Yeah, let me take the mechanics plots off the screen. Whew, I was waiting for that. Thanks, Aaron.
At the very end, you were making some hypotheses about this 60% enhancement that comes despite seeing what appears to be an increase in resistance. If I understand correctly. And you made these hypotheses about why that might be. And it seemed that there were a couple of factors at play. What do you do experimentally to tease out which one?
Yeah. Excellent question. So the answer is it's difficult. It's difficult. Probably the best way to do that would be to couple some simulation work to look at that optical interface. Through a whole host of electromagnetic simulators, and also to make some direct energy measurements with something like UPS, ultraviolet photoelectron spectroscopy. That'll tell us something about our interfacial energies. Something about if our energy wells are really where we think they are, because we have so many interacting layers. Things can pin electronics. Certainly, defects at interfaces come in. If we move away from mechanical interface issues, electrical interface issues are just as important. So, unfortunately, we kind of just propose, where the enhancement comes from. And certainly things like charge balance are important too. So that restrained flow of positive carriers that come from the work function difference could help a charge balance in our device. Just maybe that more of those positive charge carriers could increase loss mechanisms through the diode. Loss mechanisms for the main part of recombination where we don't want it.
I'm going to ask one last question.
Sure.
So, if you could, based on all of your work with the nanowires and stuff, you're the guy who knows the most about it now. If you could design whatever shaped or structured or whatever nanowire you could, forget about what's physically possible to do, but what would the optimal one look like? Would it be a round cross section or a square cross section? Would it have branches? Would it be straight?
I mean, one of the nice things about our nanowires, which they're pentagonally twinned, talk about a little bit in there. Didn't put the material science in the display, but one of the nice things about our pentagonally cross section nanowires is that they're generally single crystal, which people wave their hands and say you get nicer transport through. So if I could have a single crystal, maybe with a slight aspect ratio being flat, so I could have a nicer adhesion to a surface, maybe a rectangular, so more contact. The main things important to the optical properties are we have, say, smaller than 50 nanometer. In this case, it would probably be our length, but in a cylinder, our diameter. And what that really does is if you go through the scattering calculations, you really can suppress scattering to lower the haze. So in it, we can decouple haze. Even though it might be beneficial here, it would certainly be something that we'd like to decouple out of these electrodes. So I'd say something single crystal, long, thin, and a nice contact to our surfaces.
You're talking about the sheet resistance when you're saying long, thin.
So yes, again,
But isn't surface scattering in your fiber very important for that? For the electron.
Yes, and so if we have, say, single crystal and typical transport, I mean, it's mesoscopic for sure, but if we could think of it as, say...
Well, it's an electron mean free path issue, isn't it?
That's correct.
So what's causing that? Is it defects or is it the surface?
I mean, in our nanowires, we have to blame it mostly on the surface. So in my made-up nanowire, it's also a single crystal, so you would have more surface if I use a rectangle than a cylinder. That's correct. it's an interesting exercise. I don't know. I mean, I will somewhat reject the premise that this is it's an interesting one, but I wouldn't change that they're randomly distributed because the randomly distributed nanowires can kind of wash out diffraction and moire interference. So you have a nice flat spectrum through the visible, whether you look at whatever is, say, absorbance. You're looking at. The reason we have no features is because we have a random arrangement.
So why didn't you use graphene?
So graphene, I was looking at this after we chatted. If I want a 1 inch by 1 inch CVD graphene, which you could be kind of confident you have one layer, it'll cost you $500. So really, it's we can't make large uniform graphene in a reasonable process yet. So I wouldn't be surprised if graphene is the champion one day. But as soon as you have 2 layers instead of 1 of graphene, your optical properties quickly go away, your optical transmission. And as soon as you have grain boundaries in your sheet of graphene, your electrical properties quickly go away. So the CVD graphene that you buy on a wafer, they spec 500 to 1,000 ohms per square. I mean, they can't even CVD comes with some sort of concentration of grain boundaries that make it very difficult to use as a transparent conductor. One day. The future's close.
All right, let's thank Josh once again.
I'm going to turn off the live feed.
We'll ask the committee to stay behind and everyone else to please leave the room.